long. So Richard Fowler is our amazing guest who is joining us today. Hopefully before this, you did all of your Google stalking. You did all of your homework before you came to class. But just in case you didn't, we will drop his link here in the chat and you can do your own Google research on him yourself, but I'll give you a little play-by-play. You might have seen Richard, his writing in Forbes. You might have seen him on Fox News. He's been all over the place and he is a super, super duper impressive guy. And so I'm excited for him to sit down and talk with us about advocacy work, about values, about strategic advising. He's seen it all. And so he's going to have a lot of insights for us. So please raise your glasses wherever you are, whatever's in them, and help me welcome Richard to the show.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm wonderful. I'm excited about this conversation. I feel like there was so much buildup, and we're finally here.
I am so excited. I was not kidding. I have questions a mile long, but I won't be selfish. If other people have questions too, I'll work those in. But I'm so excited. So you do a lot of different things. And I always like to ask this question to people because when you go to a party or you go to a friend's wedding or a baby shower, whatever, what do you tell people that you do when you do so many things?
Actually, that is a really good question. Such a cliche phrase, but that's a good question. I identify as a storyteller. So first and foremost, I'm a storyteller. And my job, no matter where I'm doing it, is to tell really amazing and effective stories. And I think the best way to understand storytelling at its finest is we oftentimes forget the people that we meet, but we remember how they made us feel, and we remember the stories that they told us. And think about like growing up as a kid and think all of the stories that your mom and dad told you. Many of them, some of them were books, but most of them weren't books. Like Red Riding Hood wasn't a book. The Tortoise and the Hare, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. They were books, yes, but most of the time it was your mom or your dad or your aunt or your uncle or whoever raised you sitting down next to you at the bed or the sofa or in the kitchen saying, let me tell you a story. And they would pull up a chair and they would proceed to tell you a story. And oftentimes we pass those stories down to our children, to our nieces, to our nephews, to the little kids we meet on the street. And this is the power of effective storytelling. You'll remember the story. You'll likely forget the policy issue. You might forget what I taught. You might forget what you had to eat that day, but you'll remember the story that somebody told you. And so that's the fun I get to do every day, is telling stories and helping people tell better stories.
Tell better stories. Well, I'm excited to chat because and we have a mix of people with us. So some people are founders and I know they're leaning in being like, yes, I need help telling my story. And then other people might be leaders at big corporations who might be thinking, well, how do I tell the story of me, within this corporate landscape? So I think storytelling works no matter what you do, no matter who you are, because you're just telling a story. You just might be phrasing it in a different way.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And literally, as I'm talking to you, right above my computer, there's I write notes to myself. And one of the notes I have right in front of me is tell better stories.
Tell better stories. I like that. So, okay, I have to admit, so selfishly, I was really excited to talk to you because this is scary, but we are less than 90 days away from the end of the year. I don't know where 2021 went. In my head, it's June. It's very confusing, but it's almost Thanksgiving. I'm like, oh my gosh, the end of the year is coming. And so I'm thinking about my 2022 and I'm thinking about, my plans. And one of the things that I had written down was really that I wanted to live out my values and sort of live out the things that I think are really important in my work and have that show up more in 2022. And so I'm curious for you because I think that you sit at a really unique intersection when it comes to values and work, right? Because I think the juxtaposition of what you do is so interesting because you hold values that oftentimes in the rooms that you sit in, whether you're on Fox or whatever, might not be the popular value that's in the room. So how do you bring those to work and I guess make it look so easy, which is what I think that you do.
Well, first, Kim, I thank you. That's a blessing. If I'm making it look easy, I appreciate that, because there are days I wonder. But I think for me, it starts with, I'll start with a story, all right? So, I mean, I was raised by a single mom who was a registered nurse. And one thing she instilled in me is that no matter what happens, you sort of have to keep going. And oddly enough, like similar to you, I'm drinking some cranberry tea. And the tea bag quote says, "He who wants the roses must respect the thorns." And I think that is, it literally right before we went live, I saw that and I'm like, what a way the universe works. And so for me, when it comes to living my values, I am a big believer in one, leaning into those values often, always, and oftentimes letting those values lead me as I tell effective stories, as I decide which clients I want to work with, as I help those clients navigate what can oftentimes be some very treacherous waters, right? It's about, okay, how do we lean into those values? And when we lean into those values, it doesn't necessarily mean that we mute out or we sort of put everybody else on mute or put their values on mute. Our goal, and the reason why I call myself a storyteller and why we use stories, is because we have to bring others along for the ride. And so in bringing others along for the ride, it requires that we also acknowledge what are their values and do we have any values that intersect. So let's talk about, I mean, the elephant in the room. So, I'm somebody who sort of I'm a progressive individual, and I oftentimes have to debate with conservatives. So when I walk into the debate, the first thing I think about is, where do we find a place of agreement? And can we start from that place? Can we start from that place of agreement and begin to build out from there? So oftentimes you pick the topic, you pick the issue, right? And if we were to pick the headline of the day, which is everything like, let's talk about Joe Biden's Build Back Better plan. I don't want to talk about politics today, but let's use it as an example, right? So in this Build Back Better plan, Joe Biden has, if you ask some folks on the right, they will say it's a goodie bag of giveaways. If you ask folks on the left, they will say this is going to help poor working families raise all boats, and it's going to uplift the middle class. Where we all agree is that this pandemic was very harmful to the American people. And we all agree that we want to stop pandemics like this from happening in the future. So that's where we begin the conversation. So if I'm having a conversation about Joe Biden's Build Back Better plan, I will start with a story, right? Now, this part is not in the plan, but let's say, because it got taken out last night, but part of his plan was free community college. With the bill's moving quickly. But let's remember what the pandemic laid bare. What the pandemic laid bare is that we have a healthcare system that's stretched to the limit. Of the 700,000 Americans who lost their lives, 10 to 20,000 of them were healthcare workers, nurses, doctors, respiratory therapists, physician's assistants. So if we want to get this economy going, we have to have a healthy workforce. So if we're going to pass this bill and we all agree that we need a healthcare system that works for all of us, we could disagree on the minutia, but we agree that we need a healthcare system that works. That healthcare system doesn't work without nurses or respiratory therapists or people you can call when you're sick. So this plan has in it money to make sure those folks get trained without having to worry about the bill. So that's where we begin the conversation. Where can we all agree? We could all agree that it's terrible that we lost 20,000 nurses, and start from there and work our conversation over. Instead of what we oftentimes see in our body politic, which is, you're wrong, you're crazy, go to hell. You're wrong, you're crazy, go to hell. And nobody wants to have a conversation with each other, which is why we have so much gridlock in Washington, and most Americans are sitting at home pulling their hair out and saying, why can't you guys get it together? Every day, we have to get it together. Every day, whether or not we're having a fight with our partner, whether or not our kids have decided to put gum in their hair, and we still got to get them to school at 7:40, no matter what. Why is it that you guys in Washington, even at a deadline, can't seem to get it together? And it's because most Americans are like, well, we just figure it out. We get the kid in the bathroom, we get the gum out, and we still get them there for 7:40 because, well, hell, we got to be to work at 8 o'clock into the 20-minute commute. So what America wants is our politicians to work together. For that to happen, it requires us to find, where can we find common ground? Where are your sort of third rails? Where are my third rails? Let's avoid those third rails, and then let's begin to find some common ground and some commonality in the middle and work from there. So that's how I sort of do it, but it requires that I'm very much in touch with my values, because my values are the foundations of where we get to this conversation. I can't have a conversation with you about policy. I can have a conversation with you about coffee or tea if I'm not rooted in my values first.
Right. And I'm curious, for somebody who might be thinking, wow, like these tips that Richard is sharing, I can really take this into my, I don't know, end of the year review with my boss because I know that I want to ask for a raise or I want to ask for a promotion and like maybe they don't want to necessarily give it to me. So, I love this point from Jeff. Do you really enter these types of conversations where it might be a little uncomfortable? You might have people that have different goals. Your boss wants you to work for free and you want more money, as an example. The really bringing sort of empathy or kind of bringing that relatability is what has to kind of lead you in those moments.
Oh, I mean, I think that's a dead giveaway, right? That's the only way it works. And I think because I was raised by a nurse, I mean, I always say my mom was a single mom, so I was raised by a pack of nurses. Because because it was a village of nurses who helped both raise me and my brother. And what nurses, as well as doctors and medical professionals, have is there's something that they're taught, and it's actually something that I wish more folks had. Right? Because no matter what happens, like when you walk into the emergency room and you're that person that decides that after just having back surgery, you're going to get up and string up your Christmas lights and you fall off the ladder, the nurse never judges you. The nurse just says, hi. So you fell off the ladder and you just had back surgery yesterday. We're going to treat your pain and we're going to figure out how we can make you feel better. And they take the judgment out of it and they just look at the symptoms of the patient and figure out how they treat it. And so for me, that's the same sort of viewpoint that I have. Let's take our feelings and emotions out of it for just a second and let's actually use empathy and just treat the patient, right? And I think that goes for how we relate, how I relate to my client work, how I show up on television, even the stories that I choose when I write for Forbes is I try to pick subjects and storylines that you oftentimes don't see being told. And then I try to find, even in the storylines you don't see being told, well, what's missing here? What makes this person or this story unique to the storyline? I wrote a story a couple of weeks ago about cannabis, right? So everybody's talking about buying cannabis, selling cannabis, and it's a very interesting concept. But to look at cannabis and to not understand that the legalization of cannabis has left certain groups out of it, and these are the same groups that were in jail for selling it previous to, really caused me to say, so who are we going to talk about when telling the story? So I found a Black woman, right, who has a cannabis dispensary. Then I went further to say, but let's find her someplace that's unique. So her dispensary is in the District of Columbia. The District of Columbia doesn't have statehood, so she can't sell cannabis recreationally. She can only sell it medicinally. And then we went into why it's hard for her to find banking. So even though you are thriving in this industry, what are some of the barriers that you still have? What are the complexities to this story? And we go after those stories because there are stories that you don't often hear in the media. There are stories that you don't often see in the byline. And I use the privilege that I have of being a writer at Forbes and Steve Forbes's byline to help tell better stories and oftentimes move people. And we did the same. We did a story on African Americans owning guns. Another interesting story, another story that sort of sits on the third rail of American politics. But we actually went to go talk to African Americans and ask them why, the people who are actually these gun owners. And I think oftentimes when we have these conversations that makes most of us want to spontaneously combust, it's because we hear a whole bunch of experts talking at us, and the people who are having that lived experience, nobody's talking to them. And that goes with everything. When you hear conversations about early childhood education, and you don't see a room of moms who have to pay the early childhood education bill, right? Or you're talking about all of the fact that during the pandemic, 2.9 million women lost jobs, and many of them stayed home to take care of children. And these are people with master's degrees and people who want to go back to work. And you have a whole bunch of lawmakers talking about it, but you don't see women who hey, so I gave up my job to take care of my kids. And I want to talk about that. And I want to talk about what I need, because those are, to Jeff's point, those are actually the experts, the people who are having that lived experience. But it requires us to sort of break out of the boxes that we currently live in and actually lean into our values to say, if my value is, if I have a societal value of prosperity, or even if I have a societal value of, because I do believe that being a middle class is a value, in my opinion, right? Like, if I have a middle class value, then I need to go talk to a whole bunch of people who are either in the middle class or who want to be in the middle class, and find out what we agree on and what they need, so I can make that value come to life.
And what do you think when you're thinking about making those values come to life and breaking people out of boxes when you're working with your clients? So somebody comes to you and says, like, Richard, I need help. What is like the rest of that sentence? Like, what do you find is the most commonality that people are coming with you and they're all kind of getting stuck, like at this one point in the road?
That is a good question. I think a lot of organizations struggle with how to break through. I see other organizations breaking through, but I don't see my organization break through. And I think you see that. I see that from the client side of my work, but I also see that I get so many emails. How do I get covered in Forbes? Like, as if I know the magical tool to tell that how every Forbes writer chooses to pick their stories. And so what I try to do for my clients is I try to sit down, talk to them, and say, well, let's lean into what's the story that you're trying to tell? What's the story that you're trying to tell? And how do we tell this story effectively? And the best example, one of the favorite stories I've gotten to tell in recent history. So the Chicago Teachers Union, and I have a love for working people. My mom was a nurse. I love teachers. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for great teachers. So teachers have a really like a soft spot.
My mom was a teacher.
Yeah, I love it. I love teachers, and I love and the reason why, and I also love when teachers collectively come together, because there's no group that's more strong than a whole bunch of teachers saying we're going to get something done. And so I got a chance to work with educators as when they were out on strike. Now, before I go any further, I know a lot of teachers. I've worked with a lot of teachers. My mom is a nurse. I've worked with a lot of nurses. None of these public employees want to go out on strike. There's nothing more. And even as we talk about distance learning and virtual learning, every educator that I know, and I know them in every state, every one of them throughout this pandemic wanted to be back in the classroom with their kids. Most of the educators that I know spent time at home, instead of taking care of their own children, worrying about that one vulnerable kid that they couldn't see every day, to touch them to make sure they were okay, because they knew that them touching that child was the difference between life and death for that particular student. So I know there's educators that are so happy to be back in the classroom. And I think, to my point, because we live in this sort of echo chamber of the poles, North Pole and the South Pole, that story is not told about where educators really are. So when I got a chance to work with the teachers in Chicago as they were going out on strike, I asked them, like, what story do you want to tell? And they were like, we want to tell a story about what's happening to our students, because what happens to us reflects on our students. So we had one brave paraprofessional or teacher's assistant named Willie, and Willie was a teacher's assistant at special needs school, and Willie couldn't afford to pay rent. He couldn't afford to pay rent. He was an Uber driver after work, and he was also a Walmart clerk overnight. And then he went to go teach school. And so the story that we created, the video story that we built, was called the Willie Calculator. And Willie tells you his story at the beginning, and then literally on the side of the screen, because Willie was so brave, we put how much money Willie made at every job and how much Willie had to pay out for all of his bills and how it never added up. That story, because it was so impactful, you have this young man who's like, all I want to do is like help my kids and take care of my family, and I have to do all these things so I could go to school and take care of these special needs children. That story was shared over 4 million times. It got retweeted by Susan Sarandon. It got retweeted by Lizzo. It got retweeted by Chance the Rapper. It was till this day, people who know that I developed the Willie Calculator, and if you talk to the folks at Chicago, they always ask how. They can tell you what happened, but they couldn't tell you how the contract settled. They couldn't tell you how much teachers are making now, but everybody wants to know, how's Willie? And that's the power of effective storytelling. Willie's doing great. Willie got great.
But how is Willie?
Willie's doing great.
Okay.
Willie's doing great. Willie can now afford, he doesn't have to work 3 jobs anymore. I don't know how the pandemic is particularly because I haven't checked in on him because nobody's asked recently. But for the year after that strike, all people asked about is how is Willie? And that's the power of effective storytelling. But it requires one, vulnerability, and two, it requires you having the real conversation. It's like, what story are we trying to tell? And then, or what are we trying to accomplish? What story are we trying to tell? And also, really importantly, who's the most effective messenger? Because oftentimes we might not be the most effective messenger telling our story. Sometimes it's a customer, sometimes it's a student, sometimes it's a child. It's depending upon what's happening or who the audience is. You might not be the messenger. Maybe the president of the company isn't the messenger. Maybe it's somebody else.
Well, and speaking of that, how do you get clear on who should be telling your story or even what your story is? Because I know I'm definitely not alone as I sit here and go, oh my gosh, Willie calculator, brilliant. Like, oh, Richard, so smart. But sometimes it can be hard. I say this to people all the time. It is very hard to be objective when it comes to you. It's like when you look in the mirror and say, oh my God, I can't believe my hair looks like this today. And everyone else is like, your hair looks fine. But to you, your hair that day looks, disastrous. That, we're our own worst critic. We're harshest on ourselves. We would never say the things that we say to ourselves, to our friends or family or anybody else. So when you are thinking about your story, either for you as a person or your organization or your department or your own company, how do you get clear on that story?
Well, first, I think you have to be clear to yourself of what story you want to tell, right? And requires you to say, okay, what are the values? And I think who's the audience? Who are we trying to go after? And then the other thing that I like to do, which is actually really strange but oddly interesting, is sort of building out. President Lincoln called it a kitchen cabinet. I call it like my little team of ad hoc advisors, right? That I really don't pay. Usually my mom is one of those people, because you want to find somebody who's not in the environment that you're in, right? So my mom is retired now. She spends more time manicuring her lawn than anything else, right? Manicuring her lawn and going to prayer meeting is like on the top of my mom's to-do list. So oftentimes when I'm running a campaign, I'll send the video to my mom, like, Mom, does this help you understand? And I ask very specific questions. Does this help you understand it? Repeat back what you take away from this. Repeat back what you think you heard. And then I'm able to say, okay, well, she didn't hear what I wanted her to hear. I got to go back to the drawing board. Or she heard better than I wanted her to hear. We got this spot on. Or she heard worse than I wanted her to hear. But like, find people in your life that are, and they're usually in your family. Like, your family is your secret weapon and your resource, right? Somebody in the audience that you're trying to sell to, that you're trying to move, that you're trying to persuade, lives in your audience. So talk to them and then say, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. Take a look at this or hear that. What do you think? And before you get defensive, because the natural response with family is like, oh, I've got to automatically put my guards up and I've got to protect, because sometimes that's how family is. But the actual response is, once you're done, me and my best friend have this routine that we have with each other. It's called fold your hands. And when you no matter where we are, if I say fold your hands, we both, like, whoever says it, the other person immediately just goes quiet and they fold their hands and they wait for further instruction, right? And so once you have told the story, just fold your hands and listen. And if you listen,
I need that with my fiance.
It works.
Got some real listening sometimes. And I'm like, dishes. I should just be like, fold your hands.
And it also works in public too. Like, this is totally off the record, but totally off the record and on a tangent. But we've been out places and he was doing something that's very random. My best friend and I'd be like, fold your hands. And he'd be like, oh, okay. And it just goes back to, it's like scene.
He's like, and scene. I love that.
But in folding your hands, and I do it all the time, it just requires me to listen, because as a storyteller, I have to be a good listener, right? I have to hear what you're saying, and I also have to hear what you're feeling, right? Because those two things oftentimes could be on separate waves. You could be agreeing with me, but there's something that I said that caused you to feel a certain way. And
I
so
mean, when you think about these stories, in this case, it was for a teachers union, but for people joining, they could be thinking about their company, they could be thinking about their volunteer group, they could be thinking about a community organization that they're a part of. How important, I love this question from Charlie, how important is it to have that sort of origin story? Because I think, like, I know, going back to what you said about storytelling, I feel like I could do the Sarah Blakely Spanx origin story where it's like, I was selling fax machines door to door, but then I had the idea to cut my feet out of the pantyhose, and now I have $1 billion business. And like, I couldn't tell you much but her origin story, that whole fax machine, door to door, you're right. It's like a little worm and it gets in your head. And even if I know nothing else about Spanx, I'm like, Sarah Blakely started selling fax machines. So do you think that every organization or company or group needs that sort of really strong storyline about their origin?
I do think that is important, especially if you're bringing a product to market, because think about it. You might not buy a Spanx product, but the fact that you're able to sort of recite her Spanx story means that if a friend of yours is going out to a major event and they're like, hey, so I bought this dress and I think you'd be like, you need to get some Spanx. That's the first thing that you're going to say to them.
Oh, that's
right?
so
And you
true.
might not even own a pair.
That is so true.
The goal, like, and she's not the only company of folks. I mean, for example, my favorite whiskey is Uncle Nearest whiskey, and because the story of Uncle Nearest, the guy who taught Jack Daniels how to make whiskey, is a very interesting and compelling story. And so you buy into. Oftentimes, people will buy into the story, and the story will increase their ideal about the quality of the product, even if the product's the same as the product next to it. But this product has a story, and this product doesn't.
Well, that's true. And like, how often should you be telling this story? Is it something that you should be saying it kind of every chance you get? I guess, like, do you have to hit people over the head with a story so many times for them to absorb it? And I guess I mean, hit them over the head. It's on the website. It's on your social media channels. It's, when you're in person. Like, do you just kind of like splooge it everywhere?
Well, I think you have to have different versions of it, right? You have to have, on the website, you definitely want to have your 2,000 word version of the story with all the bells and whistles. But you might have a story. Remember, all a story has is a definite beginning, a definite middle, and a definite ending, right? So if I say at the beginning of the show, I said, I was raised by a single mother, and I'm like, the fact that I was raised by a single mother and I'm here today, and she's a registered nurse, I told you a story. Right? Because I gave, and remember, and the ideal of stories are just illustrations. You're able to see whether you know my mom or not, mind you, if she's on my IG, but you're able to close your eyes and you're able to see a nurse, and you're able to see a nurse with a little kid, and you're able to see a little kid, and that little kid turns into me. And if you're able to close your eyes and I'm able to give you some sort of illustration, I've done my job. And it doesn't take 5 minutes, right? I gave you a sentence, but it was an illustrative sentence. I gave you time and place. The fact that I told you she was a registered nurse, automatically, you might have put her in a hospital. Sometimes I say she was a NICU nurse, which automatically puts her in a hospital with little babies. So I've given you, without giving you imagery, I've given you a whole storyline if you would close your eyes. So the storytelling is more than just like, little Mary had a little lamb. In the long form, it's how do I put words in and how do I use the English language effectively, and dropping in just little pieces of illustration that causes the audience to sort of go to what I like to call Mr. Rogers' land of make-believe, right? And be like, oh, I see that. I see the hospital. I see the little boy. I see the pack of nurses raising the little boy. And before you know it, you have a complete story of me, and I wasn't even trying to give you a story.
Right. I mean, Richard, I kind of feel like you should be working in Hollywood, not politics. I don't know if you've heard that before, but I feel like instead of DC, you should have ended up in LA. I don't know.
Listen, life is still young, and the good Lord works in mysterious ways. That's all I got to that one.
That is very true. Okay, I know we said we weren't going to talk about politics, but I do have one selfish personal question. By the way, everybody can ask their own questions in the chat. I don't want to, I'm sharing time with Richard. I'm not being like a hog. Oh, and I will also say, I forgot to say it earlier. I know Richard's dropping a lot of like knowledge bombs. If you don't want to take notes, or if you're somewhere where you cannot take notes currently, go to sendmenotes.com and we will send you all the notes that Richard's been talking about. So I don't want you to like panic about writing them down. So you can go to sendmenotes.com. We'll send you the notes. But okay, here's my selfish question. And then I won't ask any more selfish questions, hopefully. So again, I'm just so obsessed with what you do on Fox and the Five and bringing yourself into these situations. Okay, Thanksgiving's coming up. And I know that I cannot be the only one who's like, okay, we're gonna have 14 people. And by the way, I just moved to Texas. So, and then my family's coming. We got a mix of people that are coming, and you know the rule. It's like no money, no politics. And then like, I forget what the third one was, that like you don't talk about, you don't ask about, because it's just like, kindle on a burning flame. How do you, as someone who, like, what advice do you recommend to people going through, whether it's Thanksgiving or holidays, where you just know you might be walking into some crazy, just some crazy.
That uncle or that aunt.
Right. Well, and it's hard because there is that position of like, you lean into your values, you tell your story, but then the other part is like, do you not tell your story sometimes? Because if you tell your story, it's going to be like you're gonna set some people off with your story.
I get it. Well, I think you have to begin where we have to begin where you started, and where we started this conversation. And I think it's first approaching people with no judgment, and then especially in the current environment that we're in, ask questions. The best thing you could do is ask questions. So, and just once when they say something, why do you feel that way? Why? How? And avoid the urge. Like oftentimes when we have these family members, like we sort of feel like this feeling rises, and the goal is just, you have one, if you meet them with empathy, and you have to there's a couple of things you've got to do. You've got to take the feelings out of it. You've got to understand that what they're saying, like I said at the beginning, what they're saying, what their feelings on two different tracks. And instead of listening to what they're saying, hear what they're feeling. Because oftentimes there's a frustration that they have. So for a lot of supporters of the former president, for example, there's this feeling that they felt left behind, right? They felt that nobody cared about their issues. Nobody was talking to them. Policies were happening to them and not with them. And those feelings are valid, right? Because those are some of the same feelings that people have who voted for the current president, right? People feel like, well, things are happening to me without me having a say in it. And so what you want to do is begin to say, all right, this is happening, and these feelings, they have these feelings. Let's get to the root of why they feel this way. And oftentimes, if you can start the conversation there, right, leaning into your values, trying to parse out when they get into the why. Well, they might say to you, well, I didn't like the fact that Hillary Clinton said that we're a bag of deplorables. Well, why? Well, because I'm not a deplorable. Well, why did you feel that? So why do you think she was talking to you if you're not a deplorable? Well, I think she's talking to everybody who, likes to ride Harley Davidsons. I'm making this up, but you get my drift. Okay, so you think that people who ride Harley Davidsons are judged? Yeah. Okay. And then you started to get, slowly but surely, you start to unravel the onion, and you start to get onto the root or the heart reason as to why they feel the way that they do. And then you could begin to, instead of having a conversation with feelings, you begin to have a conversation with the actual real why. Oftentimes what happens in these conversations, and why we're like two ships passing in the night, has everything to do with the fact that we're having a conversation with feelings, right? And if you're angry and I'm angry, that's not really going to work. They cancel each other. Anger and anger cancel each other out. But if we decide to if I begin to sort of engage you, without anger, with empathy, and start with like questioning. We're going to start questioning, and we're going to just unwrap this. I want to know why, fundamentally. And then once you get to the fundamentals, then you can begin to have a debate. Because then if the fundamentals are around, well, then you might get to you might actually be able to have a real conversation. Well, I don't like the fact that so many things are made in China. Oh, we could actually have a conversation about that because I agree, right? Or they might say, well, I don't like the fact that we're not valuing speaking English. Oh, well, okay. We can have a conversation about it, because we can have now a fundamental conversation around something that's solid, instead of having an amorphous conversation about, well, y'all didn't like Trump and I like Trump, and because you don't like Trump, and then before you know it, you're having a circular conversation and you're actually getting yourself nowhere. Hopefully that answered your question.
Shelby took the words out of my mouth, because I was going to say we just all need to channel like our inner 3-year-old and just be like, but why? But why? But why? But why? Like, just if you've ever been around a 3-year-old, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because which, by the way, at the end, at least back in my nannying days, it would be like, because I said so and I'm the adult. But can't do that at Thanksgiving. Certainly don't want to be doing that. I'm curious, for you, because you spend so much time immersed in these different storylines in the news, in what's happening in our country, where do you find time for you, like Richard as a person, to learn or to have fun or listen, that sort of work-life balance? Because I think one of the things that I always admire and also just find completely overwhelming with any of my friends who work in the news is, you kind of have to be on these things 24/7. I mean, there's always a Twitter update. There's always a Twitter review. And I'm like, how do these people find time to like live? I don't know.
So I will be honest with you. That is something that I'm actually learning how to do. And I think because life is about learning. So during the pandemic, I was one of those people who I'd wake up in the morning just right around 7 or 7:30. I would turn on, I literally have, because of what I do, there's sort of like a television not within earshot of me, wherever I am in my home, that I would turn on the TV. It'd be on the news on mute. And then as we got into the latter half of the pandemic and we got to the election, it became really, really, really like I had to begin to start guarding my energy, because it was like all of this negative energy was coming in, and like I couldn't find positive energy anywhere. So I actually got in the habit of not doing that. So I am really good at, I will wake up, I will definitely I subscribe to a number of newsletters. I pick one every morning. Some mornings it's Axios, other mornings it's the New York Times, other mornings it's Politico. And I just read that in the morning to get a sense of what's moving the day. And then once I figure out what's moving the day, I might not turn on the news per se until an alert comes across my phone that requires more news attention, right? So if an alert comes across my phone that might say, even I won't even turn on now. Like I won't turn on, like if there's like Biden expected to address the nation on the economy. These days, I probably won't turn on my television for that. I will let the address happen, and then I'll watch the address without the commentary, because on television, they pay folks like me to go up there and tell you what you should think about it. And I just want to watch what he said and digest that. So I'll wait till his remarks are finished. Then I'll sit at my computer and I'll watch that. Other than that, I try not to watch it. And then the other good thing here is when we do segments on air, so when you see us on television, we have, people just think that we're by ourselves. We have teams of producers that help us bring our segments to reality. So before I do a segment, I will get a topic and a full research packet a couple hours before, which will tell me everything that I need to know about the segment, will tell me what the anchors think, what direction the anchor wants to go in. And then I might do my research on top of that, which might require me to watch the news if it's a breaking news sequence. Like if it's like, okay, we're going to have you on to talk about Speaker Pelosi, and right now Speaker Pelosi is talking to the G20. that might say, okay, you're having me on to talk about a breaking news sequence, so thus I will be following the breaking news sequence. But other than that, I've tried to avoid the watching the news all the time, because I feel as though news is always breaking, and at this point in time they must have broke the news because it's
It's
always
too
breaking.
much.
It's
It's
absolutely
too
too much.
much.
And when you get to the
And
heart of the story, it's not even really breaking news anymore.
no. And I think you are so uniquely qualified to answer this question from Jeff because you are on the news, you are on television. That is, in some ways a persona. I mean, that's not like the envelopment of who you are totally as a person. Does that blend? Do you have like a Sasha Fierce, like Beyonce has Sasha Fierce, where it's like, and now I'm performing? Like, do you have a version of Richard that you're like, this version of Richard is what shows up on Fox as the 5, but this version of Richard is what you get at like brunch on a Sunday?
Absolutely, you have to.
Okay.
I there with my friends call him TV Richard, and there's the real Richard and the TV Richard.
TV Richard.
But I will say that they're both real me. They're both the real me. You can't to do television and I'm blessed that I've been doing it for quite some time. To do it as long as I've done it and to not be your real self up there, like what television does, the lights are so bright that authenticity, if you're lying to the audience or you're not being your true self, the audience can pick that up right away. So it requires some level of authenticity, but there are things that I save for my private life and for the people around me who deserve to have a real person in their life and a real person to have brunch with. And so I make sure that there's a distinction and delineation between those two people. And there's almost like and I've done things in my life intentionally to make sure that's a reality. Like when the pandemic first started and we were all sort of doing television from home, I was doing television from my living room. And what I did eventually, around the same time I had the epiphany about the negative energy coming into my house, because the news overall can sometimes be, while it's positive, it can also be very negative. I also had the same idea, like the ideal of work being in my living room is also very problematic. So I took the time out, went to Home Depot, went to Home Goods, and I actually built like a studio structure in my garage so I do television there. So I'm able to sort of close the door, just like how I leave my car outside. I'm able to leave that outside too.
Oh
And
my God. I love that. So
yeah, I
handy. You're
think,
like Bob Vila. So handy.
well,
I
it's
have
not
not
even,
built anything.
and it wasn't even about like, okay, it's because I had this extra space, I wanted to do it. It was very much about the intention of, I need to separate these two people, like the TV person from the real person. Like I don't need to be
Right.
waking up and going to get my tea in the morning and seeing like the TV lights over there in the corner of my living room. I need to be able to do that and live and have that experience and have friends over without everybody staring at my other life in the same space. And I'm privileged that I can do that.
100%, but it's so needed. It's so necessary. I love this sort of fun, quirky question from Anja, which is, when you do have those news alerts come up on your phone, which are the ones that you click on and which are the ones that you're like, meh, just going to let that one play out and I'll like see the synopsis afterwards?
Oh, that's a good question. Uh, you know, so let's take this week, because use this week as an example. So we got news alerts yesterday. Biden meets with progressives. I did not turn on my TV for that. I'm like, call me when there's a deal, because here's what happened. Biden met with progressives, then Biden met with moderates, and then like 3 hours later, the news broke that the bill is now a couple $1 trillion smaller. They're removing free college ed. They're removing free community college. But that, if I were to have been following the whole sequence, the sequence started at about 2:00. The news of what was actually out the bill didn't happen till 5:00. So I would have been literally sucked into a whole bunch of nothing. Because and don't get me wrong, it's our job in the news media to make sure that we're giving you guys, pay us to give you all the nuts and bolts. You pay us to analyze. You pay us to tell you what we think might be happening in the meeting based on our experience. You pay us to tell you what we think might be happening behind the closed doors on Capitol Hill, based on who we know, based on our sources. That's what we do for a living, right? So you should continue to tune in. But as somebody who knows these things and also knows how the sausage is made, I'm like, okay, he's going to meet with the moderates. He's going to meet with the progressives. And at some point in time, I'm looking like they're going to shave this down, or they're going to add things to it. Somebody's going to have to concede. And I would just want to figure out what the concession is. That's where we are. And
skip to the end of the book.
Yeah, like I know how this goes. But I'm able, I went on air talking yesterday and talked about it, right? So I was on air talking about what the sequence was, how it was happening, because I know that already. But I didn't need to be watching it. Like I didn't need to know what Congressman X said or what Senator X said, because I know what they said. Everybody came out and said, we're going to get this done. We're very close, but we don't have a deal yet. And literally they all came out and said, we're very close, but we don't have a deal yet. And so
you're like, I already know how the story's going to end.
But with that being said, now the one that I did click into was when we found out about the sad news about Colin Powell, because that was a shocker. Like I was like, whoa. Like I just literally turned on my phone and like Colin Powell dies. And I was like, whoa, what do you mean? And so that was like, okay, I need to turn on the television because this is breaking news where I'm sure they're going to give us more information in the next 20 or 30 or 40 minutes. And lo and behold, we find out he has cancer. We find out he has MS. We find out that he was supposed to get, within the time when they announced it, and about 60 minutes later, we find out a whole bunch of information that sort of puts his death in context. Number one, both him and his wife tested positive. Number two, he was a day away from getting his booster shot. Number three, we find out he has 2 other comorbidities. So we find out all of these sequencing. It makes the news more disastrous, but at least at minimum, we're able to put the news into a frame that at least allows for better understanding. It's like, it wasn't like he could have died while hiking, Mount Kilimanjaro. Still would have been sad, but that story deserved context. And I knew that within 60 minutes, we were going to get some context to that story, and we did. So I tuned in to say, okay, give me the context.
Yeah.
But then after that, we got a whole bunch of tributes.
I texted a friend. I was so sad. And I don't even know if I should be saying this, but we're all friends here. I felt like when I saw that news alert come up, to me, he gave off, and I mean this in like the coziest way possible, like amazing grandpa vibes. Like it was so sad. Like I just felt like he was this older, super wise, like a grandpa. Like, I don't know, he would hug you and like, but be tough, but like would tell you that you could do it. I don't know. It was really, he was an amazing man. I don't know. It hit me harder than other politicians who have died. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's something about, I always find, it's something about his tone. It's like the tone that he has, and the fact that, I think it's also he came to power at a time in which we were all starting to get television in our homes, right? And so he came to power with color TV, and like he was he sort of came to power at a time of the advent of cable news, and he was sort of this man amongst boys, right? He was always like one of the generals. And then when he became the Secretary of State, and then he sort of said in his private life, he shaped this really interesting space for himself around public service. And he's somebody who really didn't play the politics, even though he was political, he wasn't a politician, if that makes any sense.
100%. No, totally. Okay. I got carried away. It's time to do the speed round questions.
All right, I'm ready.
Are you ready? Okay, hold on, wait, I'm not ready. Okay. What is the best thing that you have started doing or using lately that you are obsessed with and you're telling everybody about it?
Okay, so 2 things. One, I do yoga at night, yoga right before I go to bed. Like I do night yoga, which has been amazing.
Night yoga. I like it.
Right.
Never done that.
And so you do stretches, and it's very much, it's definitely more a slower flow. So night yoga. And I'm obsessed with this new, well, not really new, but there's a skin line product. So as you know, both my parents are Jamaican, so I went back to Jamaica in May, and I was in the airport, sort of moseying around, and I found this amazing skincare product called Honey Vera, made in Jamaica, and I have been obsessed with them ever since. I have like now all their products, and they ship everywhere. They ship everywhere in the world. So I'm like, they're amazing, and people should check them
Where
out.
can you get them? Like their
I think
website?
it's honeyvera.com, if I'm not mistaken.
Honeyvera.com. Okay.
Honey, and
I'll
then
be
aloe
visiting
vera. So
that
honey,
later.
and then vera, like aloe vera.
So clever. They know how to tell their story. Clearly.
Yeah.
Okay, what is the best gift that you've given yourself lately, like in the last 12 months, that you're just so thankful that you kind of took that time and gave yourself that? It could be something physical, or it could be something, maybe time or a vacation or something like that.
Ooh, that's a good one. So I am low key. Folks don't know this unless you really pay attention to me, but I really enjoy. One of my favorite pastimes is actually cooking. So I really enjoy cooking. And at the beginning of this year, I bought a smoker box. So that is by far the most. It's brought me a lot of joy because it allows me to like experiment with smoking things. So smoked some chickens, I've smoked pork, I've made smoked deviled eggs, I've smoked oxtails, I've smoked all sorts of things in my smoker. So yeah,
Whoa,
I
that's
made smoked
amazing.
potatoes, made smoked potato salad, I smoked the potatoes and I made potato salad. So it's been and I just like experimenting with it. I'm like, I think I'm going to try to smoke this and see how it comes out. So that's brought me a lot of joy.
You have to write down all your favorite recipes and then keep it for your future cookbook.
Maybe listen. I feel as though you might be the universe speaking to me.
I'm telling you, you're going to end up in LA. You're going to end up in the cookbook. I see it. I have a vision for you. I see a vision of it. Okay. What is the next thing? It sounds like you've already mastered smoking, really any sort of food product. What is the next thing that you're really hoping to learn? Could be like a new language or a skill.
Ooh, that's a good one. I've learned how to. I've become a pretty efficient video editor So now I want to learn how to use So I think my next challenge is going to be Photoshop, like how to Photoshop. Like
Photoshop, like pictures of you or vacation or
no, just Photoshop, like how to use Photoshop in general. Because I
just
think
in general.
as somebody who lives on my side of the camera, even though I do like PR work on the other side, I haven't had to do a lot of the technical. And so during this pandemic, I've taken some time to say, okay, with the time I have not moving around, I can learn things that I haven't learned before. So I've learned how to use Premiere Pro, and I'm like, next on my list is conquering Photoshop.
What have you been using Premiere Pro for? I'm so curious.
I've edited some videos. I'm testing out some things and learning how to like shoot. Yeah, listen, it's a learning process. But I think it's really like when you do the work that we do, I think it's really important to appreciate all the people that make what we do possible. And so like I like to have a sense, even if I'm not the best at what everybody else does, at least like to be the person that knows what everybody else does. I mean, I'm one of the folks that like if I can visit the control room when I'm like I've been in the 5 control room before when I'm not on, just because I want to see, I had to get a sense of what they're seeing, because what they're seeing is what oftentimes makes what the audience sees. I don't see what the audience sees. I just see 4 people sitting at a table and some cameras staring at us. So being in the control room allows me to see what they're seeing and how they sort of make the sausage to get to what you see, and what everybody's job is as part of that experience. So I am a big believer in, I don't need to be the best or an expert, but I at least need to have a sense of what everybody who makes what I do possible, what they're doing and how they do it. And that's just probably the curiosity in me.
Well, it's definitely the curiosity in you. And I would have to say, I totally agree with Jen. The curiosity in me is like, Richard, I'm coming over for Thanksgiving and we're going to smoke a turkey.
I'm here for it.
Like, how are we doing this? Are we just smoking everything? Can you just smoke everything at Thanksgiving?
I think smoking a turkey, that would probably be like a 10 or 15 or 20 hour experience, I guess. Because I mean, it would take some time, I'm assuming, but I think you can do it.
Okay. Okay. Des said that it's the best. Apparently we have to smoke turkeys or else we're missing
I'm
out.
here for it.
So
Let's do it.
that's it. Put it on the
That sounds like
to-do
my
list.
that sounds like my next adventure.
Exactly. Okay, I have this theory that the old version used to be you are the summary of the 5 people you spend the most time with. But now, thanks to like these crazy things, I think you are the summation of the 5 accounts or 5 digital humans or content that you also spend the most time with, not necessarily in person spend the most time with. So I'm curious for you, whether it's on Twitter or Instagram or LinkedIn or any of these other social media platforms, who are like a couple accounts, they could be people or they could be brands that you follow that when they come up in your feed, you're just like, I love this. Like, I love what they're saying or I love what they're putting out. Like, it lights you up.
Oh wow, that's good. So I think I have a couple of these. So there's one that I like. I have to go to my Instagram. Let's see here. So there's one that I really like called The Good Quote, which is really, really good. And they just give you a
Okay.
whole bunch of really good motivational quotes. I also really love there's certain celebrities that when they come up in your feed, you're like, oh, this celebrity. One of those celebrities for me is oddly, but I love her, is Meg the Stallion. And the reason why I like Meg the Stallion is because of her. I just love her energy. I think her energy is infectious. You don't have to like her music. You don't have to, but her energy and this, like I'm still the girl from Houston and I just happen to be successful, and like that energy is like it's infectious. Like when you feel, you're like, yeah, so I live for her energy. I go up for her energy. I'm here for it. It just brings me so much joy when I see her, and it's like as her career grows and her career becomes bigger, it's so clear that her energy has stayed the same, and she's like, I'm just normal and I just happen to do music. And so I like every time she pops in my feed, I stop and I just like, I'm like, yes, I'm taking in all this positive energy coming my direction.
Ooh, okay, I love that. So the good quote, Meg the Stallion. What's like one more?
Oh,
You have to round it out with lucky number 3.
oh man, let's see.
Or it could be a newsletter because you talked about newsletters. Maybe there's a newsletter that you're like, oh, I really like this newsletter.
And then yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of the Axios newsletter. I'm a big fan of Axios overall. I think that they're in a pinch, and oftentimes we live these busy lives. Axios has made the news, Brett, like it's you get to the point. Tell me
Yeah.
what I need to know, why I need to know it. And then if I need to dig deeper, I will go to the New York Times, I'll go to the Washington Post, or I'll go to PBS and I'll go read the longer story. But just give me my top lines and then allow me to dictate what I want to do next. And so I give Axios a lot of credit for creating a site that says, we're going to give you the top lines. You figure out what you want to do next with them.
So true. Okay, if you give us all a homework assignment this week, maybe we have to do something, or maybe we have to read something, or maybe we have to listen to something. I don't know. But what homework would you give all of us to make our lives better?
Ooh, that's a good one. Let me see if I have my bookshelf is right here. Let me see if I have it. I usually do. It's never really too far away. But there's a book that I'm in love with. Yep, I got it.
Okay.
Hopefully my other books fall. And if you could tell by how worn it is, but like this book fundamentally changed my life, and I think everybody should get a copy. It's by Byron Katie. Oh, the camera's up here. Loving What Is.
Oh my gosh, I am obsessed with Byron Katie.
Yes.
Obsessed. She's the OG Brene Brown.
Yes, absolutely. And you could
Like,
tell how much the book has changed my life if you look at like these pages and over here and like how
wait,
worn they
which one
are.
is that? What's that one called? Because she has like 9 of them.
Yeah, my favorite is Loving What Is.
Loving What Is.
I have like ears folded. I have notes and highlights in there. And in a nutshell, what Byron sort of asked her readers to do is to look at a situation and to really evaluate, is this a true thought? Because we have so many thoughts that come into our minds. And like oftentimes those thoughts, as she says in the book, are connected to feelings. And if we can acknowledge that the thought isn't true, and then she goes through some steps like, okay, so if the thought is not a true thought, how would you feel if you didn't have the thought? would feel like this. Okay, well, you see what just happened there? The thought's not real. And I would feel this way if I didn't have the thought. And it's almost like transformational. And she really just tells you that you have to love, it is what it is. So you sort of got to, in a nutshell, it is what it is. So you sort of got to love it. And it allows you to sort of embrace the skin that you're in. And then once you embrace the skin that you're in, you're able to then make improvements. And I mean, it sort of ends this conversation where we began. If you're going to live a life that is intrinsically around your values, it requires you to love what is, even if the world doesn't love your values, even if the world doesn't like how you show up. You have got to love how you show up because it is what it is. And in this book, she tells you how to do that. But it's revolutionary. One of my favorite books, changed my life. And I actually found out about it by listening to an Oprah Super Soul Sunday. And this is how you know it's good, because she got Oprah Winfrey together. And that's really hard to do.
That's so true.
And it was
so
great.
True.
It was in the sequence around like Oprah giving money to her family. And she was like, well, Oprah, if you tell them no, what would happen? Oh, well, and she's like, well, they would be angry. But would they be still living when they get her from someplace else? And she's like, oh, yeah. What happens when you say no? Well, they just keep living. Exactly. And you're the one. And she said to Oprah, and you're the one left with the feelings. And I was like, oh, that's it.
You're like, bing! Like you hear a little bing.
Oh, it was an absolute aha moment, because as soon as she said it to Oprah, and like literally, as you know, Kim, like the one thing you don't want in audio, video, radio is dead air. You hear like 10 seconds of dead air because Oprah's like, because she has this in real life aha moment of, yeah, when people do things to you, and if you just say no, they keep going, like they keep moving. You're the only one left with these feelings of, oh, I feel used. If I don't give them the money, then I feel shame or I feel neglect. You're the only one left with those feelings. They are not.
Oh, it is such a brilliant homework assignment and point for us to land on. Okay, if people are like, Richard has been putting down such great facts and strategies and tips, where can people keep finding you? Where can people follow and keep learning about all that you're doing?
Absolutely. Jeff agrees with us. He thinks that he saw her speak. I haven't seen her speak yet. I want to do that. Post-pandemic, if he's speaking somewhere, I'm going.
Yeah.
But people could follow me on IG at Richard A. Fowler. They could also LinkedIn me, which is at Richard A. Fowler. It's all the same. It's the same on Facebook at Richard A. Fowler. And follow my stories. We're actually working on 2 stories coming out on Forbes. Both will come out hopefully in the next 2 weeks. One is with one of the new champions, a player from the Chicago Sky. So her feature is coming out, and we also did a feature about why integrated communities are actually the best way to grow America's economy. That features Mark Zandi and the folks over at Moody Analytics. So both those stories are coming out. I'm literally going back to write one now, because the work never stops. But I'm so glad I got to have coffee with you, Kim. It's amazing.
I know. Thank you so much for making time. We are going to stay tuned for those 2 articles and all of the future brilliance that you put out. So thank you so much for joining. I'm sending you a cheers from Austin.
Cheers.
Bye, everybody.